Tuesday, November 30th, 2021 at the Griffin Room. This meeting will be held in person and is available as a live broadcast on Channel 18. Members of the public with an interest in any portion or specific item on the agenda should plan for in-person attendance as usual. Also, just a quick notice, if you want to observe social distancing, you're certainly welcome to take your masks off. Otherwise, we encourage you to keep them on. Also, let's start with the recording notice that according to Massachusetts state law, anyone who attends to record the meeting must first notify the chair, who will then inform the other attendees at the start of the meeting. Anybody intending to record the meeting? Okay. I'd like to call this meeting then to order. I guess, should we do a roll call? Is that a necessary thing, or we already have our?
No, I think
Okay.
we're
We're all ready to
observed that
go.
you have quorum of full members.
So would you please join me standing with the Pledge of Allegiance? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. So we start this evening with a public hearing, case number PB 2021, Abigail Hess Roos, TR, Richard G. Hess Trust, care of attorney William Kroll, representative, requests and approval of a two-lot definitive subdivision plan, which includes the so-called Panhandle lot, and a corresponding request for certain waivers from the town's rules and regulations governing the subdivision of land. The request is pursuant to the Code of the Town of Harwich, Chapter 400, Article 2, Chapter 325, Section 18L, and Mass General Law, Chapter 41, Sections 81K through GG. The subject property is at 15 Bells Neck Road, West Harwich, Assessor's Parcel ID 10-E2, located in the R-M zoning district. Mr. Kroll.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Attorney William Kroll from Harwich Port. This evening, I have an interesting smorgasbord of petitions for you. They're a little different to keep it interesting for us all. The first one, however, is the different twist to it is that the existing owner has a lot, a large lot with a residence and a barn on it, and the abutters to the east, Mr. and Mrs. Gilmartin, who are here this evening, are interested in purchasing parcel A that's shown on the proposed plan. It consists of 12,002 square feet. Why? Because they need additional square footage so they can construct a swimming pool behind their residence to the east. That leaves the owner of the subject property with two lots. One encompasses the residence and the barn, 51,000 plus square feet, and it meets all of the setbacks. The house and the barn meet all of the required setbacks and square footage requirements and building coverage, site coverage, and the like. And then lot 2 is a panhandle lot allowed under our bylaw of 53,558 square feet, so that they could, the current owner could construct a dwelling on that lot and use the panhandle portion of it for access. So we'd have two conforming lots as a result of this subdivision. And as Mr. Eidman points out in his comments, it ordinarily would be an approval not required plan, but because it's asking for a panhandle approval, then it becomes an approval required plan under the subdivision control law. And in order to create parcel A, which is the third lot, we're before you with an approval required plan as opposed to an ANR plan. And since It's a small town. My younger sister, Terry Warner, is the surveyor who submitted, who drafted the plan, and she requested the waivers set forth in her October 15th letter to this board. And we would ask that those waivers be granted this evening and that the board approve this definitive subdivision plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Eidman?
Yeah, thank you. I have a copy of the plan up on the screen, so you can refer to that as well. You'll see the two lots that are proposed. Let me get this working. There's the proposed Panhandle lot. That's that 12,000 square foot parcel. And this is the other lot with the existing construction on it. I guess I want to make, I don't have a lot to add from what Bill said, but I want to add kind of more of a discussion about the waivers and kind of a commentary on the process the town has for approving these panhandles. One of the things I'd look forward in the future is to change the requirement in the bylaw that you have to go through a full subdivision process, because that's kind of the genesis of having to ask for these wholesale waivers. There will be times where a panhandle lot is sought in a normal subdivision where you're creating a road, but where you have existing frontage here, and this is off an improved public way, Bell's Neck Road, there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of sense to bring it through the full subdivision process. And all it leads to is a request for these wholesale waivers, which frankly, they don't apply, because most of the requirements in the subdivision rules and regs assume that you're building a new road with all the improvements that go along with that, like drainage. I think there was an idea that if you brought this through the subdivision process, then not only does the planning board have more of an opportunity to review it, but has some discretion over the matter. Frankly, planning boards have little discretion over subdivisions. If they meet the rules and regulations that apply, a planning board has to grant a subdivision. So what I would suggest in the future, if the planning board wants some sort of review over these and wants some discretion over them, that should be in the nature of a special permit. So I would suggest, as we look forward to changing maybe the bylaw over time, that we substitute a special permit requirement in the same way that you have a special permit over alternate access special permits rather than a subdivision. So it's a long way of saying that I would recommend that you grant the waivers as well and approve this, but the genesis of needing all those waivers is because we have this requirement that they do this through the subdivision process. One of the primary waivers they're seeking, or one of the primary things they're seeking a waiver from is from security, to securitize the performance of the subdivision, but there's nothing to secure because there's no road that's required. So it almost just follows naturally. If there's no road, what security are you going to require?
Right.
So in all, I really don't have any conditions other than that if you see fit to approve this, that the decision be recorded at the Registry of Deeds and a copy of that be provided to the board. But it's my recommendation in the staff report, and I'd be happy to elaborate on anything in there, but I also don't want to belabor this, that the planning board approve this definitive plan and grant the request of the waivers as identified in the staff report. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the board?
I have a question.
Mr. Stoltz?
I would like to see, if we do approve this, I would like to see it have an as-built on the plot plan, because it is now 3 lots instead of just 2, and I think it's a good protection for everybody involved.
Mr. Edmund?
Okay. What would the as-built show, other than maybe some concrete bounds that aren't installed?
Plain and simple, everyone who gets involved in these 2 extra lots will know exactly where their lot lines are.
Okay. I think the proposed concrete bounds are shown on this plan. So it would be the same plan, it would just represent that they were actually be installed as
Just
proposed.
install the bounds, plain and simple.
Okay. That may be something Mr. Kroll wants to speak to. I hear your point, I don't see the need for it, but it's up to the board what you want to do. But I think the applicant should have some sort of response if they want to about that.
Mr. Cole?
Is Mr. Stoltz proposing that there be additional bounds put in other than what's shown on the plan?
Where the two X's are, which are not bounds, that's where they're gonna divide that parcel A. Those should have the cement bounds. And it doesn't say that all these bounds have been found. So,
Well, some of them are not found, they're to be set,
Right.
yeah,
so that's what I'm looking for.
okay. So do you,
Would you say again what you're looking for, please, Bill?
Is for all the bounds for the three lots to be set.
Lot 1, Lot 2, and parcel A?
Parcel A, yes.
okay, so there are no proposed bounds on parcel A. Would you
Right.
like that marked by bounds?
Yes.
Okay.
Just those two,
Yes, sir.
and then set the other two
Right.
for lot one, but nothing more than that.
No, they already have, the back corners are already found, and some of these middle ones are found.
Keeping in mind that those cement bounds are not cheap these days.
Neither are the lots, but
But the usual concept of an as-built is to show the distances of houses and structures from lot lines, and that's already shown here.
That's
So
shown,
you're not
right.
suggesting anything.
no, I'm not asking for that.
I don't think there would be any objection to having those two additional bounds put in.
Any other questions from the board? Questions from the public? Yes, please address the podium and identify yourself and your address.
If you'd be kind enough to sign in as well, there's a sign-in
Sure.
sheet. Thank you.
My name is Phil Johnson. I reside at 25 Belknap Road. So we're in a butter just south of this. I'm sorry, we're in a butter just south of the lot that you're talking about. My first question would be, can you explain to me what Panhandle incorporates, what it is?
Sure. I mean, panhandle is a colloquial name, but and under the Harwich zoning bylaw, really what it means is a lot that otherwise lacks the required lineal amount of frontage. In this district, you would need a lot would need 150 lineal feet of frontage. Through the subdivision process, you can seek to have a lot with 35 feet of frontage along that reduced frontage portion, what looks like the handle of a pot. What the zoning bylaw requires, if that is to be approved, is that the building portion of the lot, the regular shaped portion of the lot, contains all the zoning requirements. So that contains at least 40,000 square feet of area,
I
which is the
understand.
zoning requirement of the
Okay.
district. So that's essentially what a panhandle lot is. And there are some dimensional requirements for the panhandle. It can't be more narrow than 35 feet in width, both along the road frontage and along any part of its width for access. And then it can't be greater than 300 feet in length. And so this plan represents consistency or compliance with those dimensional requirements of a panhandle lot.
So am I right to assume that that will be the access to Lot 2, as you see in the plan there? In other words, a driveway, an access to that lot, is that correct?
The driveway would be located in that, quote, panhandle portion of that property.
And how close to the southern border there would that be? Would the driveway be, or could that driveway be?
Do you mean the northerly border? The southerly
I'm sorry,
border-
yes, a northerly border, yeah.
Okay. The Harwich zoning bylaw allows a driveway for a residence to not be set back at all from a lot line.
Okay.
So theoretically, it could be on the northerly lot line.
So that brings up a problem in my eyes. I live just on that lot line. My bedroom window is 35 feet from that lot line. And if there's a driveway there going into that Lot 2, I would be concerned about that, mainly because I have my windows open all night when we sleep. Let's assume, for the sake of argument, that whoever does develop that Lot 2 puts in a house in a crushed shell driveway. You know what that sounds like when a car goes over it. I can hear the road across the street from me, my neighbor, and it's much further than 35 feet away every time a car goes in and out of there. If there were to be a driveway there, I would be awake all night long. Let's go even further and say that somebody builds a house there, 2 adults, 3 kids in their 20s. There could be 5 cars going in and out of there. Kids in their 20s, they don't even go out till 9 o'clock at night to celebrate. God knows what time they'll be coming in. So I have a concern about that. I hate to bring up a problem without a possible solution, so let's just say this. Look at the south side of that line. There's 39, just almost 40 feet between the southern border and the corner of the barn. I'm not sure if the attorney here knows if that barn drawing there is the corner of the barn foundation, or is it the corner of the shed that's attached to the barn? But either way, you've got 39 feet. You could put a 35-foot panhandle in there. It wouldn't affect anyone, not just me, but my neighbors to the east of me and to the neighbors to the east of that. There's nobody along that lot line, that southern border there.
So you're talking about putting the panhandle on the southern part of the-
Correct.
Right. The problem with that is you create a zoning nonconformity with the barn,
In what way?
setbacks to the barn,
So how much of a setback does it need?
20 feet.
So there's a shed there in the barn that doesn't even have a foundation.
Yeah.
What if that were to be taken down and gives you another 15, 20 feet?
When a surveyor, especially an eminent surveyor like Bill's sister does a plan, they have to certify that those are the existing conditions. So I trust what you see on the plan are the existing conditions.
So what can we do about it? Nothing? As in a abutter, what can we do about nothing having a driveway right along our boundary line there?
Well, I think the thing to do is make your comments known and your
Okay.
concerns known to the board, and they'll take all the comments back and they'll discuss it amongst themselves.
I'd appreciate it if you would do that, because it does concern us. And like I said, it's right outside our window. It's right on our borderline. There's nothing on the other side, on the south side.
Sir, could you tell us your name again, please? I want to pick you out on the plan.
Phil Johnson. It's, I don't think you're on, just on the top left corner.
Philip C. Johnson.
Correct.
Right there, Joe, that property, right
Say again, please. I see it. Okay. Here.
there, Panhandle, that's Mr.
Okay.
Johnson.
One other concern I want to mention too is that the grading of that lot slopes towards the north, or towards my property. How would that be, any kind of runoff be applied on that? You understand what I'm saying? It slopes towards my land. That whole lot slopes towards northern slope. What about runoff on that?
Do you want me to address some of these things?
Please.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm asking you. I'm not sure. Should I be asking
Well,
Duncan?
it's their meeting and I'm their staff, so,
Okay.
Let's,
okay. I think the drainage would apply to any residential property in the town. And the thing to consider with a driveway is, even if this plan wasn't done, that driveway could still go there, and it could still be on the lot line with no setback. I'm not aware of any particular drainage requirement for any residential property in the town. Now, when a driveway, if and when a driveway gets put in that panhandle, what has to be secured from the town, specifically the DPW department, is a driveway permit or a curb cut permit. And one of the things DPW looks at is whatever construction or apron is out there can't dump runoff onto the public way. So that is one way to look at stormwater, but in the town of Harwich, we have no particular stormwater requirements for residential properties. They're for commercial properties.
So you're saying it cannot run off on the public way, you mean Bell's Neck Road?
Correct.
Right.
So it could run into my yard.
It could, and
And
that's
that's-
the nature of any residential property in the town.
Okay.
And there are remedies for that. They may not be regulatory, they may not be permitting. But if somebody was dumping water onto your property, you probably have what's called a tort claim. It doesn't, the town doesn't entertain those, a court does.
That doesn't sound like fun.
Mr. Chairman?
None of it's fun, no.
Mr. Stoltz?
Gentlemen, I thank you for your time. I'd just like to consider what I commented on this, and maybe there may be a solution to this, to the southern part of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Mr. Stoltz?
John, I think in the state building code, there is something that says that another person's lot cannot let drainage go onto another lot.
Yeah,
As
there
part
are
of
some
the building.
drainage requirements
Right.
under I'll say it's difficult to enforce. It's not the same level of drainage you see in a site plan review that the building commissioner undertakes.
It's always the responsibility of the building commissioner to make sure that doesn't happen.
Are there any other comments from the public at this time?
Hi, good evening. Name's John Rowan. I'm at 37 Smith Street. Our rear property line butts the proposed development. If this property is to be developed, is a way we can be involved in any type of tree buffers or where the house will be sited, or is that beyond the planning board?
It's the building inspector, I think.
So it wouldn't be until they pull the building permit? Okay.
It's hypothetical at this point.
I was just thinking a natural buffer would be advantageous to all the abutters as well as the new owners, I would think. And access to this lot may be better, as Phil was mentioning, to the south. There's no way that you could give them a waiver for that and let them come that way?
That is beyond your ken,
Right.
to require plan changes that otherwise require zoning variances beyond the ability.
But is it possible to do that?
No.
It's not possible for this board to require that, which would then require a zoning variance.
So it's not, okay. Okay, well, thank you for listening.
Thank you, Mr. Kroll.
Yes, thank you. The owners explored the possibility of the panhandle to the south, and it was not practical.
Right.
Because it would create a non-conforming setback for the barn, which would then require us to go to the Board of Appeals to seek a variance. And you have to argue for a variance that you have a unique shape, size, or topography that causes you to have a hardship that arises from the unique shape, size, or topography. And if we're creating the hardship, creating the nonconformity, it's a self-imposed hardship. We're not going to get that variance from our Board of Appeals, I can tell you, because I'm in front of them quite a bit, and they're very reluctant to grant them. Putting the panhandle in the south is not a practical solution. I would suggest that if the driveway, I think the driveway requirement, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Ivan, is 16.5 feet in width.
That's just a cleared area. That doesn't have to be the traveled portion, 12 feet for a traveled.
Traveled portion, but the cleared area is 16.5 feet.
Correct.
Which would leave the ability to have, let's say, a 10-foot buffer
Right.
from Mr. Johnson's property and the properties along that northerly lot line that would increase the distance. I would not have a problem with a condition to that effect. because we
Stipulation to a,
Retention of a
Retention
10-foot
lo-
vegetated
yeah,
buffer
10-foot
along the
buffer.
northern portion of the panhandle.
okay.
Where would that be again, please?
10-foot buffer on the north
North
part
edge.
of the panhandle
The
portion.
driveway along here, and the buffer would be between the driveway and
I
the
see,
line.
okay.
So we have somebody else in the audience. Please identify yourself and your address.
Hi, my name's Margaret Hudson. My partner Talitha Abramson and I own 25 and 31 Smith Street. And I just wanted to make a point that both us and Phil and Marie are full-time residents. So we're here year-round, and I know John and Mary are close to being full-time residents as well. So I just wanted to make that point, that these are all residents that are here year-round. That's all.
Thank you.
Mr. Kroll.
And if I may also, Mr. Chairman, what's being proposed meets all the requirements of the zoning bylaw. It meets your requirements.
Right.
We're not asking for anything out of the ordinary. It's allowed by the bylaw to have a panhandle. As Mr. Eidman stated, there's no restrictions regarding driveways. As Mr. Stoltz stated, it's my understanding that one property owner in general is not allowed to have water run off their property and create a nuisance on the abutting property. So we would be careful, I would think, to avoid that. But there's beyond what I've stated about putting in bounds and a vegetated buffer on the panhandle, the owner is allowed to build a house on Lot 2. There's no restrictions other than they have to be 20 feet setback from the lot line. So I know that all of us get used to having a vacant lot, but the owner is within their rights to build a house on this because it meets all the zoning and planning board requirements. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Mr. Kroll. Mr. McFarland.
Mr. Kroll, do I understand that this Lot 2 will eventually be 65,000 square feet?
No, that
Why
12
would that be?
Wouldn't the 12,000 merge into the Lot 2?
It's being subtracted, that's being,
It's just the
No, the
opposite.
parcel A, we're creating parcel A to deed to Mr. and Mrs. Gil Martin, who are the abutters to the east, so that they can build a swimming pool.
Oh, I missed it. Thank you. Okay, I got it.
any other, yes, correct, Mr. Chadwick.
Thank you. Probably for John. We're here and discussing this because this is a proposed panhandle lot, essentially. If that were not on the table, would the homeowner have the right, without coming before the planning board or any other regulatory board, to put in their own driveway to the existing house in that essentially same location? The curb cut in the same place as shown on this map, only it goes to the house and stops there?
Yeah, I think there are a couple questions there. Without any lot division, could a driveway be put in there? The answer is yes.
Okay.
Because the restrictions on the number of curb cuts are largely about commercial properties. The owner of that property could put in a driveway in the northerly portion of the existing lot, right on the lot line. There's no setback to a driveway. If there was a lot division and the bylaw didn't read the way it did, require subdivision, this could otherwise be done by way of an A&R plan.
Thank you.
Any additional questions from the board or from the public? From the applicant? So, Mary?
I would
Ms.
just make
Leslie?
the comment that for those in the audience, the willingness to have a 10-foot buffer on that panhandle is not something that the applicant really has to do, and they've been, through council, have said that they would do it. So it's not something that we could require without their agreement. So I would just, put that out there as, I would hope you would, as neighbors, would see that as some action of good faith on their behalf. Because as Mr. Eidman had stated to us earlier, in a situation like this where, Attorney Kroll has shown that they meet all of the requirements, our hands really are tied in that situation. And sometimes when the shoe is on the other foot, if it was your property, you'd probably want to develop it yourself. So, we understand it's always different to have a new house built. I've had it happen myself. I had a spare lot next door that I grew up next to, and 18 years later, there was a house in my driveway, and there was nothing that we could do about it. But, things happen, and I have lovely neighbors now, so hopefully you will all feel the same at some point.
Thank you. Do you think
Mr.
it's?
Chair, Mr. Harris.
Yes, Mr. I'm sorry.
about 12 years ago, this exact condition happened. And the two parties, the one difference was that there was only one abutter. And the two got together and made an agreement to have the driveway on the northern part, in this case, also northern in the situation I'm talking about, on the northern side, and a legal buffer between the driveway and the property line. But wasn't something that the planning board agreed to. That was an agreement between the parties. Essentially, that establishes a legal relationship between all the parties to require the new house and the new driveway to be put where everybody agreed it would be. And then between the driveway and the property line, a stand of arborvitae were put in, and it provides a visual barrier, and by visual barrier, it gives you a psychological sound barrier. There's no problem with the sound between people driving along that driveway, and I can attest that this has worked very well because I was the abutter. So I can assure you that this is a solution that would serve you all.
Point well made. Please address the podium, Mr. Johnson.
Yeah, I just want to make one comment for what it's worth, and it's probably more directed to the attorney, and I'm not sure. I didn't catch any. John? Yeah, Dan. My understanding is the parcel A, you're going to take ownership of that in order to extend your pool. And going by what you just said as far as neighbors getting together with neighbors, what is the possibility, just thinking out of the box here, of putting a panhandle through the side of your property going in? Well, you have, what, 210 linear feet? Oh, that's where the, okay. Forget that one.
Okay, thank you very much.
Let's try.
I think it's time to entertain a motion with this
Mr. Chair,
stipulation.
before you do that, could I just add one thing?
Yes,
Because I
of course.
envision that we're going to have a few more conditions we've already discussed appended on here. Bill, is there any way, because if this is approved, there's still a 20-day period to actually sign the plan. Would Ms. Warner, you think, entertain adding that buffer to the plan as well as the additional bounds that Mr. Stoltz has requested? I think that may be a way to eliminate the need for an as-built plan. Add those bounds. We'll still make these conditions of a decision. Add the note and maybe a demarcation with dotted lines about a retention of 10-foot vegetated buffer, panhandle area. And if you're really interested in this, Bill, I think rather than having a plan done just to show that bounds were installed, we could certainly have a certification by the surveyor that they installed the bounds as shown per plan. I think that should be satisfactory.
Or we could ask them, just instead of doing a bound, they could put in a steel rod so that everyone knows where that lot line is.
Well, I think they're willing to
I didn't hear
put
what
it
you
on-
said, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. They could put a steel rod in, or they could just put a wooden stake in, and then it would be up to the new owners of that property. And that's basically for their.
Put anything permitted in,
Yeah,
and it might be in their best interest to do so,
I would think so.
yeah.
It's a little bit unusual on a plan to note wooden stake to be installed. So I think it either needs to be a permanent monument that's proposed or
Right.
not. I don't know how many surveyors do iron pins anymore. They
No,
tend
they
to be
still do,
concrete
'cause
bounds.
I just had them put in my lot.
But
so.
maybe we could, maybe the thought about the condition could be to add additional permanent markers to demarcate the westerly boundary of parcel A, show those on the plan, and then this 10-foot vegetated buffer when this Mylar is to come back for signature.
Okay.
And then if you really wanted to see something further and make them prove that they installed the permanent bounds, either concrete bounds or iron pins or whatever is shown on this plan, it could be done by surveyor's affidavit,
That's
rather than having to do an as-built plan, which
Right.
would basically be a recapitulation of this plan.
Yeah, I think the surveyor's affidavit would be fine.
Okay.
That would be agreeable to the petitioner.
Very good. So, ready?
Move to close the public hearing.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right.
All right, so I move that the planning board adopt the recommended findings set out in the staff report dated November 17th, 2021 for PB 2021-21, 15 Bells Neck Road. And that the planning board further approve the definitive subdivision plan and requested waivers for 15 Bells Neck Road subdivision, and that said approval be subject to the recommended conditions as set forth. One, that a certificate of approval or decision shall be recorded at the Barnstable County Registry of Deeds together with the approved definitive plan. Recorded copies of the decision and the plan shall be provided to the town building and planning departments. Two, that a definitive subdivision plan be revised to show the installation of permanent boundary markers, surveyor's markers along the the easterly property line of parcel A, or the westerly property,
Westerly.
property line of parcel A. And that the plan also be revised to, that the owner of the Panhandle lot maintain a 10-foot vegetative buffer along the northerly side of the panhandle of said lot, and that buffer also be shown on the definitive subdivision plan, and that prior to the issuance of a occupancy permit, that a surveyor's affidavit be submitted to evidence the installation of the surveyor's bounds.
Second?
We have a motion.
Does that, council, is that what you agreed to? Okay.
We have a motion, we have a second.
Can I say one thing
Yep.
about the certificate? I mean, who knows if, when the house gets built out there. Bill, what do you think about providing that? I mean, I imagine somebody's gonna get out there immediately upon recording this plan and put those bounds in. So is there some better time? Things fall off the table, the longer things go. By the time a house is built out there, I don't know when it'll be. It's hard to, I mean, we
Well, I
could
can
do
re-
it, but it's hard to keep track of it.
I
Is
can
there-
revise my motion.
Well, no, is there a better time to index that requirement to? For the surveyor's affidavit to show that the monuments have actually been installed?
Prior to a building permit for the swimming pool,
Well, it could,
because we're going to incorporate parcel A.
good idea.
Okay.
Prior to further construction of a pool on parcel A. Yeah.
So I revised my motion
Okay.
for that time frame instead of an occupancy permit.
So the motion has been amended, it has been seconded. Any further discussion? Sure, let's take a vote. All in favor of the motion as proposed?
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes unanimously, congratulations.
Thank you very much for all of your consideration.
That takes us on to case number PB 21-22, Christopher Pepe, DBA Blackbeard's Bait and Tackle, lessee and applicant, care of William D. Kroll Esquire, representative, requests a modification to certain terms and conditions contained in the use special permit waiver of site plan review decision issued for PB case number 2021-02. This request is pursuant to the Town of the Harwich, Chapter 325, Sections 51, 55 and 149 through 159, and Chapter 400, Article 3. Subject property is 11 Route 28 in West Harwich. Assessor's parcel ID 10-N3, located in the West Harwich Special District. And we will recall this from earlier this year. Mr. Kroll.
Thank you. Attorney William Kroll from Harwich Port, representing Christopher Pepe, who is seated to my right. You may not recognize him, not because of the mask, but when he was here before, he had a very lengthy grayish beard.
My wife made me get rid of it. So
Been there,
I had no
done that.
choice.
Thus, Blackbeard's bait and tackle. In any event. We're back per your request by November 30th,
Right.
just in the nick of time. And I want to try to keep my presentation simple because the historic district bylaw is very, at this point, to me, it makes my head spin, trying to figure out what it says. It's very, to me, circuitous, with all due respect, and Byzantine. So, we're back before you prior to November 30th, or on November 30th, to seek a permanent now use special permit. If you haven't been by the building, there is a big sign there now that says Blackbeard's Bait and Tackle, and Mr. Pepe was open, thank you very much, last spring and summer to test the waters, no pun intended, for bait and tackle shop, but he's now seeking to have that temporary use special permit that you granted on March 9th become a permanent use special permit because he wants to continue to change the pre-existing non-conforming restaurant use to the bait and tackle shop use. And it's his contention that his use does not conflict with the purpose of the district, since retail sales are allowed in the district in a non-historic building. And even though this used to be the Friendly's building, it's not considered historic in that district. Mr. Eidman will have some things to say, I'm sure, about the nature of the bylaw, but when we were here before, previously, we were trying to keep ourselves under 1,000 square feet. We were at 950, but we had a lot of additional part of the building that would be happy to use for retail space. And Mr. Eidman's interpretation of the bylaw is that we have to be over 1,000 square feet, not under, in order to comply with the terms of the bylaw. So we're happy to expand the retail use area of the building.
Yes.
Now, more importantly, or just as importantly, we are asking that you modify your decision regarding the necessity of a site plan. When we were here before, we were asking for a waiver of that, and I agree with Mr. Eidman's reading of the bylaw and the interpretation of the zoning bylaw in general, that a site plan would not be required in this particular instance, that there are other past practices where I believe the board has granted or not required a site plan in situations such as this, where you have an existing building, we're not changing the footprint, we're not changing the relationship of the building to the site, anything of that nature. When we were here before, Dan Croto from Moran Engineering gave an estimate that it would cost approximately $5,000 for a site plan. Right. And we're asking that the board modify its decision and make a finding that a site plan is not required for this property, for this change of use, permanent special permit. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kroll. Mr. Eidman.
Yeah, I think there are kind of three issues that are implicated and need to be addressed in this particular application. Modifications to special permits, as I see it, come in two varieties. The first variety, which isn't applicable here, is someone intends to change their project, add an addition, add more parking spaces, et cetera. This is a case where the modification is sought to change the decision itself. And one of the ways is the special permit was a temporary special permit that was granted. Second was the requirement to have a site plan prepared. I'll get to the thornier issue, which really wasn't identified in the decision to begin with, this whole idea about a special permit for retail sales greater than 1,000 square feet. But I'll begin with the temporary nature of the relief that was granted prior. Certainly, planning boards or special permit granting authorities have the ability to limit a special permit in time. But if you do that, there should really be a reason to do that. There should be some specific time reference that you're indexing the relief to for some reason. I didn't see any reason for that here. It was just kind of arbitrarily. I think there were a lot of things flying at the board at the time. We were without a planner. There was COVID. It was a remote hearing. So an awful lot to deal with. So kind of there was a 6-month, what I would call, punt. I don't see the continued need to do a punt. If you wanted to limit the permit in some way, I guess it would be appropriate to limit it by making the relief personal to the applicant rather than running with the land. That is to say, if Blackbeard decides to take his pirate ship and move to another town, somebody could, if the permit ran with the land, then someone could come in and do the same use without any other permitting. If the permit was personal, if the permit ran with the land, that's what would happen. If it was personal to the applicant, notwithstanding that it was the same use, someone would have to go through this permitting process. So I think that is the option that should be before the board, and I added that in my comments to the board. Second is this nature of doing a site plan. There not only wasn't the site changed at all or the building changed at all, the bylaw doesn't require the site or building to be changed whatsoever. There's a surplus of parking on the site. I think there are 66 spaces. What you'll see up on the site, and I actually went to the site and kind of corroborated this, other than my personal experience with friendlies and growing up in Harwich over all the years, is the site is remarkably the same as that 1975 site plan, which was provided the last time. And that plan actually provides you some of the setback information you would need. The only reason a plan would be of some value is to determine whether or not the building was non-conforming or not. We know it is. It's too close to the westerly lot line. But that really doesn't change the permitting at all because there is no physical change in the site, either proposed or required. So doing a plan would give you nothing else. It wouldn't give you any more information you would need. What you would basically get, if you really want it, is an as-built site plan. To me, it's just not necessarily a fair thing to ask the applicant, especially as the tenant, to expend those costs to do so. Those are my opinions about that. The last issue, which I think is the thorniest, is there was a reading of the zoning bylaw to begin in permitting this, that the retail sales had to be less than 1,000 square feet. And in fact, you have to put all these things together. It's like a syllogism. In non-historic buildings, special permits are available for retail sales greater than 1,000 square feet. It seemed a little strange to me, but I confirmed with Cape Cod Commission staff that there was a policy behind that, that if retail sales were allowed in non-historic buildings less than 1,000 square feet, it would contend with potential small retail operations that wanted to locate in historic buildings. So apparently there was some thinking about that, and so there's a real intent here. There was a limit on retail sales in the existing decision to less than 1,000 square feet. I think as a matter of law, if you're to kind of reissue this special permit, you have to allow it to be for greater than 1,000 square feet, based on the reading of the zoning bylaw. I think there was maybe some confusion. There's kind of a confusing section which melds nonconformities along with the triggers for site plan review. And there were 3 stages, 0 to 250 square feet, 250 square feet to 1,000, then 1,000 and greater. So if you are, for an addition or change of use, 1,000 square feet or greater, there are different requirements than less than 1,000 square feet. What all that fails to see is you still have the authority to grant waivers from site plan review, even if there's a change of use 1,000 feet or greater. And I would certainly suggest you do that, because the standard for waiver site plan review is the proposal doesn't change the relationship of the structure to neighboring properties. Certainly, that case is almost made for itself, because other than a sign, there were no changes to the exterior of the building or the site. It's just under 1,000 square feet, there's what I would call a presumptive waiver of site plan review.
Right.
Which I don't really know what that means, because it would just mean you don't need any site plan review. But we'll leave that to another
I
day.
think that language came from Eastham, so, as I recall.
And they have they have kind of Eastham has a confusing site plan review scheme that involves residential properties. And I'm not sure whether this was recognized, but I think even as this is worded, residential properties are subject to site plan review in Harwich. But our site plan review standards from section 55 of the bylaw really are scaled to commercial properties. So that's kind of a potential problem I think we might need to deal with in the future as well. So those are the 3 issues. I put my recommendations into the, and recommended findings and conditions in the staff report for you. So I think those are the issues you're primarily looking at.
Thank you, Mr. Eidman. Are there any questions from the board? Mr. Chadwick?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On item number 2, the argument you make, I find to be very convincing in terms of the need for a site plan. But I'm a little bit bothered by the fact that we were very clear that it was needed if an extension or continuance of the underlying, so on and so forth. And that's why we're here now, as I understand it, along with those other 2 items. And you mentioned that there was a lot going on at that time, and I do recall the case, and I recall a conversation about it, but I don't recall the specifics. So I guess the question is, I would feel comfortable if we could determine what the reasoning of the board was for putting that condition in writing and making it here, either through the minutes, if there were something, or the video of, if there is one. I think you said there was a...
I looked at the minutes, and it almost seemed like a Groucho Marx bit to me, that there was a waiver of site plan review, so, but there was also apparently a request to waive the need for a site plan. And there was a lot of discussion about that, and it was hard to, because those are 2 different things.
Right.
It was hard to parse those things from one another. I didn't see any other reasoning in the minutes. The other thing I want to remind you of is a very recent special permit case. Seagull's Ice Cream in Harwich Port, the Port Center building.
Yeah.
A very, if not the same situation, a very similar one. No change to the site required or proposed, reconfiguring interior space, a tenant with not a lot of control over the property. You accepted a septic plan from 1989.
Right.
Yeah.
Ms. Maslowski?
I can recall it, I can recall the hearing very well.
Me too.
And I can
As
speak
do
to
I.
And I
Yeah.
can speak to what happened.
Thank you.
I was
Good.
late coming into the meeting.
Yes.
Mr. Eidman is correct in that there was no town planner. There had been, I believe, some advice from staff, remaining staff, that we could not, we should not be waiving the site plan. Mr. Kroll gave a good argument on the basic tenets of waiver of site plan, and the members of the board strictly disagreed and could not come to an agreement on whether or not we could issue the special permit without full site plan review, and without the site plan being submitted. So it was literally a proposal to punt for 6 months to get them through the summer.
Right.
And then make a requirement that they come back. And it was
To revisit the
it
issue.
was done on the fly, and it was through truly my recollection, because I wasn't able to vote on it because I came in halfway through the hearing, was that there was no consensus of the board at the time, and all we got a consensus on was on a punt to get them through the summer, so, and to try it out, so.
I also think that I recall the onerous cost of, imposition of costs on a starting a small business. And that, as I recall, Mr. Kroll had indicated that substantially more important enterprises had been undertaken more recently with the board, with not so much as a, kind of drawing on a napkin kind of a thing. And my recollection is we weren't going to go that far, but we were going to revisit the issue. So,
I would simply close my comments with whether we were right or wrong. I think it was done with the best of intentions
Correct.
to get.
That's exactly right.
To get a tenant into the building during the summer, and.
That's exactly right.
You know, here we are now, and if we have better guidance, thank you. So I would say I appreciate your opening comments.
Joe, did you have your hand up? Okay. Mr. Kroll?
Yes. What was not making sense to me during a hearing was, I said several times that it doesn't make sense to me to require a site plan in order to waive the requirement for a site plan.
Right.
That
That's
was
exactly
not
right.
making
That's right.
sense to me.
Right.
Still doesn't make sense to me, especially when Moran Engineering was saying the abutting properties have not been surveyed. There's no benchmark for him to go from to make a site plan of this very large parcel and parking lot, and it was gonna cost probably $5,000 to a solo business owner.
Right.
So if the board could reconsider that and modify, I'm sure Mr. Pepe would be greatly appreciative of that. And I know that your decision was made in good faith to get him in for the
Correct.
season and then come back and revisit it tonight.
And as speaking as a neighbor and as the very first dishwasher at Friendly's in 1975.
You did
I
say
can-
that at the
I can
planning.
assure you that the building has not substantially changed inside or out. So. Anyway, did we have any, or are there any comments from the public that would like to address this issue? So where do we stand here then?
We close the public hearing?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And-
Opposed? Okay, unanimous.
Make a motion to modify the existing special permit decision for the property in case number PB 2021-02 to 1, make permanent the temporary use special permit and waiver of site plan review. 2, remove the requirement for a new site survey plan of the property. 3, remove the limitations that retail sales only occupy less than 1,000 square feet of the existing building's floor area, and allow the entire existing building floor area to be used for retail sales, but at a minimum, retail sales of at least greater than 1,000 square feet of the existing building's floor area.
Have a motion, we have a second.
Can I make one modification that we just also reiterate that the decision should be recorded with the Barnstable County Registry of Deeds
Absolutely.
and shall run with the land?
Second.
So we have a motion, we have a second.
I have a question.
Sorry, Bill.
We have a comment.
Are we gonna put in that this will be for the leasing of the property only?
I think we just said the stipulation was whether it was
I
run with
was,
the
I was
land.
making the motion that it run with the land,
Oh,
but
okay.
if the board believes
I think it's
otherwise.
supposed to run with the new proprietor, right?
I believe that was a suggestion that the town planner made,
Right.
that if we were,
It's something you
if
could
we were
consider.
concerned. with
I
it.
think one of the considerations is this was put, this structure was erected by a large national retail chain. And anyone who's going to occupy it next is not going to have the resources to bring to bear, I would imagine, to do this kind of research on the property. So the idea of having it run with the land frees up future owners to, am I correct?
Well, I'm simply going with the recommendation, the original staff recommendation was
Right.
to have it run with the land. If the
Correct.
board wishes for it to die with the lessee, then I think the board can choose to do that.
Should we revisit the argument pro?
Well, maybe Mr. Kroll can offer something.
Okay.
He has his pen right.
Yes,
My-
sorry,
my-
Mr. Kroll.
Suggestion, even though the public hearing is closed, but you've asked me the question. So
Yes.
my suggestion is that because the use special permit is for retail sales, bait and tackle shop, that it would, I wouldn't have a problem with having it run with the land because it would have to be a similar use.
Right.
So if Mr. Pepe decides to sell, it helps him to not have to have that prospective buyer come back to this board to get approved by this board when he's going to be doing the same thing,
Right.
or substantially the same thing.
Mr.
Can I
McFarland.
just ask you, do you also own the bait and tackle next to the lanyard?
I do not.
Okay.
I own the one in Eastham, the Blackbeard's up in Eastham.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Was that your intent, John?
No, I'm just, I was throwing out ideas for you to chew on. I would prefer that it run with the land.
Okay.
Unless there was some specific reason that it be personal. There was some, concern you had with this particular operator.
Right.
But I hear what you're saying about that use. Remember, one of the purposes of the West Harwich Special District is to support small local business. This is of a size that you're not, even at 2,500 square feet, you're not going to get a really big business
Right.
come in here. And anything that strengthens the, one property in the district strengthens the entire district.
Ms. Masowski.
I would just say I personally think it's cleaner to have it run with the land. It's gonna be recorded.
Right.
It's gonna come up with, in a title search, and it's traditionally how most special permits are. They run with the land as opposed to running with the
So you just
individual
put it in
lessee.
your motion?
Right. Well, it's
I
already
did.
in.
Yeah.
It's
I
already
did.
in.
I thought
So,
so.
are we ready for a vote on the motion as given?
Yep.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Thank you very much.
Thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
Good luck with it.
Yeah. And I believe we have an attorney that's familiar to everybody here who will be representing our third case. Case number PB 2021-23, Grid Projects Company, Michael Marcotte, CEO, lessee applicant, care of Mr. William D. Kroll Esquire, representative, requests modification to a site special plan permit approval. Decision in case number PB 2001-18 to allow for the installation of a 5,500 plus or minus square foot solar canopy / carport and associated site changes. The request is pursuant to the Code of the Town of Harwich, Chapter 325, Sections 55, and Chapter 400, Article 3. Subject property is located at 254 Queen Anne Road, Assessors ID 58-K7, located in the I-L zoning district. Okay, Mr. Kroll.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Attorney William Kroll from Harwich Port, and I did not plan to have three on one evening. It just happened that way, including when I looked at Mr. Pepe's deadline and said, oh, we better get in there by November 30th. So I thought that these were sufficiently different petitions, so you won't lose interest in what I might have to say. So in this case, this is the self-storage units on Queen Anne Road. All of us go to the landfill, and we see them on the right. And the current owner, Tammy Thatcher, has authorized me to represent her this evening, as has the proposed tenant, Grid Projects Company, Michael Marcotte, CEO. Michael's company is based in Denver, so he's not able to be here tonight. But I've been in touch with him throughout and been in touch with him today about it all. And what he's seeking to do is to modify the existing site plan that was approved by this board in 2000 and then modified in 2001. There are currently 2 buildings, as you can see from the plans that were submitted, self-storage buildings. And the board has the authority to modify that decision. I also pointed out in my narrative that under Chapter 40A of the state statutes, Section 3, that no zoning ordinance or bylaw shall prohibit or unreasonably regulate the installation of solar energy systems or the building of structures that facilitate the collection of solar energy, except when necessary to protect the public health, safety, or welfare. So, it's kind of affirmative action for solar arrays to give them the leg up unless it can be demonstrated that such an array would be a detriment to the public health, safety, or welfare. So what we're proposing to do is to build a canopy to the rear of the property over the existing parking area. I have solar panels on top of that canopy. To do so, when I've talked with Michael Marcotte about it over the last several months, why do you need to expand this and be over the parking area and be 5 feet from the rear lot line and 15 feet from the abutter? And it's for grant writing purposes. They have to generate enough solar energy to meet certain requirements before they're going to get grant money from state, federal government, wherever they get it from. So that's why they have to push the envelope. So I would submit that if you're going to push the envelope on a property, this is a good one to push it on because you're in the industrial zone to start with. The northerly abutter is the Mid-Cape Highway, who probably isn't going to care too much if you're only 5 feet from that lot line. Most of us wouldn't notice driving by. And then 15 feet from the sidelines, there's presently no abutter on the westerly side. On the easterly side is Tom Birch Landscaping. I don't believe he's here this evening. Mr. Marcotte has talked with Tom, and Tom said he has no problem with going to 15 feet instead of 25 feet. There would be, because we're not changing the footprint of the storage units, we're not changing the building coverage, I would argue that the canopy is not a building as in the traditional sense, more like a carport. If it weren't for Chapter 48, Section 3, that is saying that you cannot unreasonably regulate it, that is a structure, so that it might ordinarily require a variance from the Board of Appeals, but in this case, as Mr. Eidman points out, it's up to the building official to determine whether this would constitute an unreasonable regulation to say that they could not come 5 feet from the rear lot line. It's not up to this board, but this board can certainly weigh in and make its recommendation to the building department in this regard. So, I don't pretend to know all the particulars about solar photovoltaic devices, but they're shown on the plan, the construction of them. Michael Markot's company does this nationally and is well-versed in the subject, and we would contend that the proposal would not constitute a danger to the public health, safety, or welfare. And for the board not to grant it, we would argue would constitute an unreasonable regulation concerning a proposed solar energy system or canopy. We would ask that you grant the relief requested this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kroll. Mr. Eidman.
Yeah, thank you. I think I'll make some comments just from a kind of a higher level planning perspective first. Relative to solar in the site, there are several planning benefits associated with locating solar on the site. The first is just the co-benefit associated with a solar carport, that you're getting bang for the buck there. You're providing coverage for parking, but you're also providing clean energy generation with that solar canopy. But as was said, this is the industrial district. It's a disturbed site. Route 6 is the northerly abutter. I think Route 6 is a 500-foot layout with at least a 100-foot vegetated buffer to the traveled highway. And as I don't know the specifics of this particular case, but I'm assuming it involves what's called distributed energy, which is these panels would first provide energy for the site, direct energy for the site, and the excess would go to the grid under some net meter, and there'd be some net metering arrangement there. What that does is ultimately strengthens the entire energy grid by supplying that energy on site first, with the excess ultimately going to the grid, so we all have those electrons to use for our lifestyles. So those are planning ways, other than just getting to the site plan review, to argue in favor of this being located on this particular site. But we're here specifically for a modification of a site plan. And the things you look at during site plan review are drainage, screening, parking, and circulation. In terms of the drainage, and I'm suggesting this as a condition of the decision, there really is no change in the drainage patterns in the site other than this canopy to the rear of the site. So I think it's sufficient, because we do have a letter from Chris Nickerson from DPW, who basically says, they've had some problems in Queen Anne Road in this area. There should be no additional contribution of stormwater into the public way. So I think so long, and it's really kind of standard fare for some of these canopies, they should put a gutter on, a downspout, and it should ultimately infiltrate into a stormwater leaching basin, which I think is already on site. So I'm suggesting that as a condition of, a recommended condition. So it deals with the kind of drainage issues associated with this particular project. In terms of screening, this is to the rear of the property. So the building, those buildings, the lower, naturally screen this canopy, though in an industrial district, I'd say that that screening probably is less necessary than in some other district. I think a solar canopy is perfectly appropriate in terms of the aesthetics and effects within an industrial district. I had some concerns originally when I was speaking with Mr. Marcotte about site circulation. He was kind of looking at the site in one dimension and putting as large a solar canopy to the back of the site as possible. And my issue was, there's not only parking back there, but that's a drive aisle. So I was happy to work with him, and he basically halved the size of that canopy to the rear of the property. It's still within what would otherwise be the required setbacks, but now there's a sufficient drive aisle, and there's sufficient ability for vehicles to park under that canopy now. So I was happy to see that. I think the most complicated issue involved here is the one that's been alluded to relative to Chapter 48, Section 3 of the Zoning Act, which sets out certain limitations on what town and city zoning bylaws can do and certain exemptions. The exemption for solar is not as broad an exemption, say, for nonprofit educational uses, but nonetheless, there is some there is some exemption afforded solar uses under the State Zoning Act. This board doesn't have the ability to determine what those setbacks are, but is certainly in the position to provide an opinion about what this board thinks are reasonable in terms of setbacks, to provide through the decision to the building commissioner, who ultimately makes that determination. I think the other wrinkle here is there are structural setbacks. In the industrial district, there's a 50-foot setback, which would certainly effectively prohibit this canopy use. And there are 25-foot side setbacks. The parking setbacks, however, interestingly, are 5 feet. So it almost seems inconsonant that you would have the ability to park within 5 feet of the rear property line, but you would want to put a parking canopy over it in some cases, and you couldn't because the parking canopy constitutes a structure to which there's a setback. So that's another thing, I think, which supports the argument to the building commissioner for the co-benefits associated with a parking structure and a solar canopy, and then 48 Section 3, essentially providing the building official in the town with the authority to determine what is a reasonable regulation under the circumstances with solar. I would certainly support that this is reasonable under the circumstances. The other kind of legal point I wanted to make is this particular type of use isn't expressly regulated under the Harwich zoning bylaw. You'll recall that large-scale solar, which is 250 kilowatt DC, is regulated. The only thing that's really before the board in this case is that canopy. Interestingly, you'll see, I think it was just for illustrative purposes, those rooftop panels were added. Those are done with there's really no zoning implication with those. Those are done by way of a building permit. So really what is before you to consider maybe under zoning is just that canopy. That certainly is not a 250 kilowatt DC system. But based on 48 Section 3, I would read a small-scale solar operation, which is less than 250, to be allowed as a matter of right, because basically you can't prohibit the use. You can impose reasonable regulations in certain situations. I would say the setbacks that are being proposed are reasonable under those circumstances. So let me go through some of the conditions I suggested. I want to note one of the first comments I made was that Planning Department hadn't received a large plan set for the file. We did, in fact, finally receive at least one hard paper copy of the large plan set, so we do have a copy of that. Recommended conditions of approval: the development proposed shall be in accordance with the site plan set and other plans and documents referenced in the application materials set out and above, and that's in that proposed finding 14. Decision shall run with the property. Decision shall not be effective until it is recorded the Registry of Deeds. Changes to the site not authorized under this decision may require further planning board review and modification, except as expressly provided for or modified in herein. The terms and conditions of the existing site plan special permit decisions remain unchanged, including there is a prohibition on outdoor storage at this property by virtue of the decision. One thing I'm suggesting, and we should probably talk about this, is there is parking under the canopy, but it's not defined in any way. So what I'm suggesting is that concrete wheel stops be provided essentially to mark those spaces. And there are 12 spaces proposed underneath the canopy. And I think that's a fair and reasonable thing to ask of the applicant. And that was actually a requirement of the original decision that was just, I don't know why, but simply was never done. I mentioned my suggestion that a gutter downspout and leaching system be provided for the canopy or carport to manage and infiltrate stormwater runoff on site. There's also some lighting that's referenced in some of the plans, but there's no details about the lighting. So I'd like to get some of the details about the lighting. Certainly any lighting would have to meet the Harwich zoning bylaw, which is basically a dark sky bylaw. I can certainly see lighting here. Why it has to be anything but downlit under the canopy itself, I don't know. So if they want to do lighting, certainly they have to provide some specifications to the building department as they pull building permits. And then there's
Probably be solar powered, Mr. Eidman.
that would be great. That makes total sense. That's another type of distributed energy generation on site. And certainly, there's a standard requirement for an inspection certification, an as-built plan, as Bill was talking about in another case. So we would want to see an as-built plan of the solar canopy. Another note I put in here, it's for discussion. I don't know how far you want to go with this. But the site doesn't have a lot of vegetation on it. If you saw fit to require additional vegetation, I think it's within your purview to do. Whether you think that provides any particular benefit or there's room to do the same, that's up to the board. I think anytime you have a requirement like that, it should be scaled to the application before you. So you shouldn't look at the entire site. You should say, how is that in proportion to the effects or impacts of the particular project which is before you, which is just the solar canopy. So that's just some kind of food for thought or something to discuss. But other than that, I'm in favor of approving this. I think it's consistent with the bylaw, and there are distinct planning benefits to the siting and the siting of this in the specific project.
Thank you, Mr. Edmund. Do we have any questions from the board? Mr. Stoltz?
I do. I'm not happy with the setbacks they're putting on the plan. It's supposed
Which
to-
setback,
Bill,
Bill?
I can't hear you.
I'm not happy with the setbacks on the plan. The rear they're going for 5 feet like it was a parking lot instead of a structure. On the sides, they're going for 15
15,
instead of 25.
correct.
So I'm not happy with that. But I think the way I would like to see it written up, if they do get approval for those setbacks, that there be something in the approval that will stop them from ever enclosing that carport. Because then it would really be non-conforming.
Why would you be opposed to them closing it in? Don't you think that would dress it up a little bit?
Only because setbacks, that's all.
Then it just becomes a solid mass right at the
Becomes a
butt,
solid
right at the
mass.
edge of the property
Is
line.
that 5 feet instead of 50 feet, is it?
Yeah, it's unlikely to happen. Remember, the plans you're approving, and I made a note of this in the finding, that I think they use the term typical. I don't like the term typical in plans. What I've suggested to you in the findings is the way we're reading typical, and I would add this in the decision, is what's being proposed. And the plans here are clearly an open canopy. So if they enclose it, that's not approved.
They have
It's
to
not-
come back.
It's not part of these plans, right? And at that point, it would be a building.
But they-
So a
then
building
they could
setback,
go-
I think,
But
should
they
be
could go
treated.
back later and say, okay, now it's a hardship because I've got the structure there. And I
I'm
want
not
to
sure
use it.
it would be a hardship not to be able to close it in. I think the answer is kind of an easy no. And there's no argument to make under 48 Section 3 there, because you don't need that closing in the walls to meet the state zoning exemption for solar. There would be no reason to enclose the walls under 48 Section 3 for the solar exemption.
I happen to be the guy that has to go to the dump every week from my house, so I go by this thing every week. And currently, he's got some trucks parked back there, doesn't he, Bill?
Yes.
We're talking about?
You can see them on the screen there.
Yeah, I thought so, yeah. I mean, it doesn't bother me one way or the other, but
They're parking spaces,
yeah. Now you're gonna cover them.
right,
Why?
in order to have solar panels on top. Generate solar energy.
So my question would be, why aren't they putting solar panels on the buildings that already exist?
They will be, but they don't, that is, as Mr. Eidman suggested, is a simple building permit, they have to issue it. So that's part of the plan, is to put solar panels on those storage units as well.
I think also for them to be cash flow positive, they have to have a certain number of, certain scale, a certain quantity before they can generate sufficient electricity, A, to be self-sufficient, and B, to then be positive, and C, then, of course, to go for the grants, so.
Right. And if you produce more than you need, then you can sell that
Right.
on the grid. I believe they're called SRECs.
Well,
Mr. Harris?
It's a different system now. It's a tariff-based system. They're not SRECs. Now we're in this, what's called the SMART program, not the SREC system anymore.
All right.
But yeah, it's a tariff-based system, and I'm sure it's important that, I think they're a lessee. So the owner is getting some benefit out of this.
Right.
With some reductions on energy costs. But basically, they're like they're a vertical tenant on the buildings. And the tenant is gonna get the benefits of some of the, I'm sure, the tax credits that go along with this. But the net metering, what's called the net metering rights, which is the electrons generated over and above the energy used on site.
Mr. Harris?
John, I'd like to get a little more about your rationale for the gutter downspout and leaching system. How is the runoff handled now?
Well, there is no canopy today.
There's
I
nothing
understand
there.
that, but there's not gonna be any more rainfall on it.
No, to the rear of the property, there's gravel and there's a stormwater leach pit back there.
Okay, what is the grading back? Does it flow away from the boundary with Route 6, or does it flow toward Route 6?
It flows towards Queen Anne Road.
Okay. Given the location and the slope of the canopy, it's gonna be dumping water off the edge.
That's why I thought a gutter and a downspout. You can't just count on the gravel to, I don't think
No,
you
I
can
understand
necessarily
that.
pick up the,
No, I'm not objecting to it, I'm
Yeah.
just trying to understand it better.
okay.
So your gutters would run to the north and dump the water in the back, and there need be a leaching system on the north side of the parking area, is that correct?
Now, as I understand this, the high point to the canopy, I don't know what the degree angle, the high point of the canopy, I think, faces Route 6.
That's correct.
The short point, which is 14 feet, is towards Queen Anne Road, towards the buildings. So of course, the gutter and downspout would be on the southerly portion of the canopy.
The gutter would, not the downspout could run back to the north.
Yeah,
Run east
I
and
wouldn't
west,
see
right?
even a need, I mean, it would just be on the south side.
Well, you gotta have some place to put the water, and.
It would be in this
the
so,
leaching system is on the north side of the parking lot.
yeah, I don't think it's on the north side. I think it's on the, there's a plan here too.
If it slopes toward Queen Anne Road, it'd be difficult for that to happen.
Yeah, let me show you this. There is a plan. If I could get rid of this, remind me tomorrow. Right there, see, that's the, you see my cursor? That's where the leaching facility is. That's where the catch basin is.
On the north side, along the boundary to
Yeah.
Route 6.
Now, I'm not sure whether this leach facility will be appropriate. They might need to put another one in, but that, I think that's a fair request, given the comments from DPW.
I'm concerned about the difficulty of putting a leaching system between the buildings and the parking area.
The leaching system isn't really that big. It's not like a leaching facility for a Title V system.
Right. It's more like a, if I may, Mr. Chairman, it's
Yes.
more like a dry well.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
talked to Mr. Marcotte about this, and he understands the concern of Mr. Nickerson from DPW. He has no problem with gutters and downspouts and tying it into a leaching system. We discussed the fact that this is as far away on the property from Queen Anne as you can get, so that any additional drainage, I don't see it running down into Queen Anne Road. If you've got gutters and downspouts and dry wells, I think it would take care of it. If it doesn't, I'm sure he would hear from Mr. Nickerson, but he has no problem with the condition, with the condition proposed.
I have a question for Mr. Kroll. How common are these carport-style superstructures on the Cape?
I don't know the answer to that.
There's one at the parking area in Captain's Golf Course.
They're not as common as they probably should be.
Because they're usually low. I've seen the solar collectors quite low. But for those of us who've been paying attention to inclement weather over the last 3 years and what's occurred to gas station canopies that have been uplifted, bent, torqued, in this case, these entities would be put out of business immediately with high winds, and this is not uncommon here.
Yeah.
I wonder whether or not this is something what is of concern to us or the building department, or, I mean, I don't see that this is, you know, kind of a,
This would have to go through the building department, and it has to meet the code requirements.
because it looks really sketchy to me, you know, like concrete foundation to be determined. You know, and this is basically one floor off, one story off with hundreds of square feet supported by two vertical elements. It's,
Oh, if I may, I would suggest that have more of a vested, the petitioner has more of a vested interest in making sure it's structurally sound
Absolutely.
than a canopy over, that doesn't have something that's generating income on
Right.
top of it.
right.
So they're going to build it in a way that is going to protect their investment.
Right,
They'll have to get a building permit for this
Yes.
from
Right.
from the
Well-
town.
Well,
So
not just that, I think it's
that's their-
construction
That's
control.
their department.
yeah. I just didn't know if that's part of our purview, but it's something that obviously is an issue of, I would say, material issue to the zoning area. I mean, the
This is
protection of other
substantial
properties.
foundation.
Okay.
So the ones that are lower basically can be a pier type of system that are kind of spiked into the ground. These are reviewed for wind loads, snow loads. I think they're basically subject to construction control, where you're gonna have your engineer who's participating in the building permit sign off and certify as to a lot of the foundation and other structural requirements, something like this. So I think it's beyond our purview, but it's not
Okay.
beyond everybody's purview who
Right.
needs to understand the significance.
And this
of
is a
issues.
national company. It's not just they picked this one site to build this on. They do it
Right.
national basis.
Mr. Chadwick, sorry.
Thank you. First of all, definitely 100% behind the solar application here, and I think the location, as pointed out by everyone, is great. But I do have a question about the picture it's actually a bird's eye photograph showing the location and the angled parking lots. And it looks to me that, I guess I should ask the question. We say this is a carport / solar canopy, and we need a minimum of 12 spaces and those spaces are available. But is it, what do I want to say, temporary parking, meaning, or employee parking, that somebody's gonna come in and use their storage, get something out of their storage unit, park there and then leave? In that, if that's the case, then, and we already have a condition that says there's no outside storage permitted, a previous condition from the previous approval, but if I look at the picture, there's boats on there in this picture. Not ours to regulate, I understand. Would that be building department? How would that be handled? And I guess I should have asked this question first. Do we have any applications of this same type where it's a carport with a solar canopy in Harwich that has come before the planning board or other regulatory boards here in town?
The only
This is
one,
our first application.
the only one I'm aware of that, I'm not sure it's been constructed yet, Cranberry Valley was talking about doing one. I'm not, town projects are subject to site plan review. All I can say is, and I'm extricating myself from this, I wasn't here at the time. It should have gone through site plan review if it didn't.
It didn't, and they never did
They
it.
did after the
That
fact.
they ended up filling in where they were going to do that up there.
Okay. I'm not aware of another, I mean, I've gotten a call about doing one perhaps over the parking lot, the park and ride. Of course, that's a residential district there. If it was done by the state, there are sovereignty principles, and the town doesn't have zoning jurisdiction over the state. But if it was done through a contract with a private company, through a lease with the state, then they would have to seek a variance. So sometimes these really great ideas we still have zoning in place that doesn't allow for them.
Johnny, are you asking if there are any here for precedent purposes or to see what the structure looks like?
I don't understand your question.
I said, you're not aware of any solar,
I'm not aware of any solar carports being developed in the town. I was aware of the potential proposal for the Cranberry Valley one, but I think, Joe, you said that it wasn't.
They put it in the wetlands area below, but there is one at Captain's Golf Course in
in
Brewster.
there, yeah. And I think Wacquasit has, I don't think they're carports, but they're kind of high, tall, solar panels that are freestanding.
There'll be a lot more of them.
Excuse me, Mr.
Okay,
Chairman.
sure.
Is this the type of thing that would be or should be reviewed by the fire marshal for safety purposes, since we don't have one in town? I understand sounds like the solar need is paramount, or the regulations, what do I want to say, encourage the permitting for solar. But I'm just wondering if there are any issues with storing vehicles, because it looks like there are going to be vehicles stored underneath the canopy
Yeah.
in terms of.
I don't think so. We did reach out to fire. We always reach out to, for special permits, we reach out to fire. No comments. Where there's battery storage that accompanies solar panels to store that energy, fire departments are much more concerned in those situations. But there's no battery storage component to this.
Mr. Stoltz, did you have also a question?
No, I'm all set.
Okay, Mr. Kroll.
Just a final comment, if I may. Two comments. One, this is because of the use of Queen Anne Road, that everybody goes there to go to the landfill. This is a good advertisement for solar energy, and they don't want to have something happen there that, such as wind problems, that's not going to be good public relations for them. And number two, I think this is along the lines of, if I may, of our town being pro-solar energy and trying to, even though trying to adapt this site for this type of use in the industrial zone. I think it's a good use of the property and would benefit the town. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kroll. Shall we close the public meeting?
I move that we close the public.
Did you take any comment?
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Do we have any public comment? Yes, I did. We do have none.
I move that we close the public hearing.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
So,
All right, so I would move that the planning board adopt the foregoing recommended findings and conditions set forth in the planning comments for staff report for PB 2021-23, site plan special permit modifications for 254 Queen Anne Road, dated 11/17/2021.
Second?
any further comment? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? None opposed.
And I would move that the planning board grant with conditions modification of the existing site plan special permit decision to allow the solar canopy carport and associated improvements at 254 Queen Anne Road, case PB 2021-23.
Second?
Any further comment? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Unanimous.
Thank you very much.
Congratulations, Mr.
Sure, Mr. Marcotte will be pleased, and I want to thank the town planner for all of his input and help, not just on this petition, but all three of them. They were unique, each one of them, and I really appreciate his assistance.
Duly noted. So we move to the public meeting section of this evening's proceedings with PB 2021-24 Eastwood Companies as applicant and prospective buyer Robert Fratas, Jr., owner. Proposal seeks to approval of a 5-lot preliminary subdivision plan for an open space residential development pursuant to the Code of the Town of Harwich, Section 325-51E and Chapter 400, Article 2, as set forth in Mass General Law, Chapter 41, Section 88K through GG. Property is located at 0 Route 39, map 63, parcel C3 in the R-R and W-R zoning districts.
Any plan you want me to put up, I have all of them, so I'm happy to put them, whatever you need on the screen.
Good evening, gentlemen.
Good evening, David Clark, Clark Engineering, and Bill Marsh from Eastwood Companies. Just one correction, Eastwood Companies now owns the property. They acquired title after we filed for the preliminary. So what we have before you tonight is a preliminary plan for a 5-lot subdivision. The total land area is a little over 300,000 square feet. And there's a significant wetland on the property, which is shown on the plans. The limits of that wetland was delineated by Blue Flax Design. Eastwood Company will be filing in the next few days a request for determination for the Conservation Commission to agree with the delineation. So we prepared a grid subdivision showing the 5 lots. As you can see that one of the lots would be severely impacted by the wetland setbacks, although they would still be buildable under conservation's regulations and zoning. We have about 850 feet of road to get back to the last 2 lots, the south end of the property. All the lots conform to zoning as far as frontage and shape requirements. One lot, Lot 3, would be considered a panhandle lot under your regulations, having less than the required frontage. If you'd like to discuss the grid subdivision, be happy to do that. We also prepared a open space subdivision. As far as Eastwood Companies is concerned, they would prefer the open space subdivision. It doesn't really save them anything in road construction, but it pulls all the construction of the single-family homes out of the buffer zone to the wetland. So similarly, the open space, with the requirements, with the additional shape requirement of having a 50-foot circle, provided the requisite buffer around the subdivision on the east side and the south side. There is less of a buffer on the west side, but the bylaw allows a reduced buffer when it is adjacent to other open space. And obviously, the Little Shaver Lane next door has a significant buffer associated with that subdivision. We're also in the process of filing with Natural Heritage. This is mapped habitat or priority habitat for endangered species. That filing will be going in shortly. We'll see what happens with that. We still have some work to do here. The regulations require that we just show drainage in a general manner, and that's what we've done. We still have to do a full-blown drainage design that's in conformance with the state's stormwater policy. We understand that, as well as the Selectmen's stormwater permitting process. We have not been to the Board of Health. This is just a preliminary. We understand what's required from them. So we're in the process of preparing that information for the filing, and with the Board of Health, especially their nitrogen or not their nitrogen regulation, but their developments that would generate over 2,000 gallons a day as requiring an environmental impact report. We have haven't started that yet, but we're waiting for this, get through this portion of the application, and then we'll go out, do a perk test, and start the permitting process with the Board of Health. I'd be happy to answer questions.
Mr. Idman, do you have any comments on this?
I have some, and I prepared a staff report. They did prepare a grid subdivision. The grid subdivision supports the number of lots they're showing on the open space plan. This is in the RR zoning district. It's also in the drinking water protection district, which means that the open space plan is allowed as a matter of right. There's no special permit required for that, no discretion. It's basically part and parcel of, if that's what they choose to move forward with, it's part and parcel of the subdivision approval. All other things considered, assuming the wetlands are what they are as they're delineated, certainly the open space layout is preferable to the grid subdivision. Basically, it takes all the proposed development, I think, except for just a very small portion of at least the preliminary drainage, out of the 100-foot wetlands buffer. So clearly, that's superior. Just for others here, for edification, this is a preliminary plan, and I'm sure you know, but just so this is expressed, this is not a permit. If you approve this tonight, it's not a permit at all. Frankly, if you denied it, there's no prejudice in moving forward with a definitive plan. This is just an opportunity for the applicants to get good input from the board, especially where an open space plan is proposed, and that layout has to be superior to the grid subdivision plan. So I think this is a good opportunity to kind of lay out all the potential issues and have them discussed. I'm going to go through what my recommended conditions are that we would expect to see addressed in a definitive plan. There aren't proposed road names on the preliminary plan. That's fine. We would expect to see those, the three alternate names in the definitive plan. Mr. Clark mentioned they're going to have the wetlands delineation done through the filing of a request for determination of applicability. That's great, because the linchpin of this entire plan is determining where and what the wetlands are. One thing I've specifically asked for, it appears that the wetland is shown as completely a BVW. I believe there's a pond in there.
Depends on what time of year.
Yeah.
In what year you look at the Google Earth image. It's been dry before.
Okay.
But
Well, what Conscom approves is what we go with. But
Yep.
to the extent there is a pond, it's important to show that.
Yep.
I think one thing we would like to see, if they move forward with the open space plan, is just the proposed method of ownership of the open space land. Of course, under the regulations, it can be deeded to the town outright, if the town will accept it. It can also be held by a homeowners association, subject to a conservation restriction. So those sort of issues, at least in concept, should be worked out when the definitive plan is filed. Ultimately, the Board of Health, amidst, beside what Mr. Clark mentioned, will, I think, require what's called a nitrogen aggregation plan for lots this size. It's another reason why it's important to kind of lay out what the wetlands are on the site. It's an open question. I'm not sure whether you're allowed to restrict land underwater as part of your nitrogen aggregation land. That's more of a nuanced question, and I'm sure it'll be worked out in the process. But to me, it's just another reason to kind of lay out exactly what type of wetlands there are on site. The Board of Health will also review this for purposes, they'll require a nitrogen loading report too, because this is a drinking water protection district. And there's ultimately going to be a limitation on the number of bedrooms or nitrogen that can come from any particular sewage disposal system on site. Unfortunately, I don't think this area is yet slated for sewering, even though Great Sand Lakes is right across the street and has one of the highest densities in town, but nonetheless, I think they're probably looking at some sort of on-site system. It's also not in the Pleasant Bay watershed, so there isn't a requirement to do a centralized nitrogen-reducing system. As was mentioned, this is within priority habitat under the Massachusetts Endangered Species Act. So the Natural Heritage and Endangered Species Program has some jurisdiction over this. What we'll want is to incorporate whatever information is gleaned from the Heritage Program into the definitive plan. I'm not sure whether they would be able to get whatever permit is required by that time. It could be a letter determination, it could be a management permit. I don't know what's gonna be required here. You know, it could be a letter determination with a requirement that 66% of the site, which is usually the requirement, be restricted in perpetuity. If that's the case, that should actually be reflected in the open space definitive plan that comes forward. The one minor thing, but the open space, the definitive plan should specify that the allowed use of the buildings is for single-family residential use, just so there's no confusion later on that you could do two-family use. It's just a product of the zoning bylaw. Two families aren't allowed within an open space residential plan. They mentioned the fact that they have to get the stormwater permit, which is a local MS4 permit from the Board of Selectmen, which is the stormwater authority, that requires consistency with the stormwater best management practices and stormwater handbook from the state. So it requires stormwater infiltration in addition to treatment of stormwater for water quality purposes. We'll look for a list of all the waivers, or what are sometimes referred to as incentives under the zoning bylaw associated with the open space definitive plan. We've already actually received a deed establishing record title to the property that is now within Eastward MBT LLC, which is the trust title holding entity. Under 12, recommended condition of approval. The point of this is just to say, for some reason, if the wetlands changes or heritage has some specific requirement, if it kind of disrupts what you could do on the grid plan and the number of lots, then that would affect the open space plan. Because the number of lots on an open space plan are contingent on what you could permit under your grid plan.
I would take exception to that,
Okay,
in that your bylaw says how many lots you can get under your regulations. So if MISA came back and said the grid subdivision could only be 4 lots, we would still go for the 5 under the open space.
okay. I think the bylaw also references wetland areas. So if those wetlands changed, and if wetlands were revealed indirectly through the heritage process, that's what I'm getting at.
Okay.
I understand your point,
Okay.
yeah. Yeah, what, you know, we would also want to have the land staked with the potential roadway and the wetlands at the time the definitive plan comes through, so we could go out to the site and make a, you know, potentially a site visit. That's in the subdivision rules and regulations of the town anyway, so
So we typically stake the center line of the road,
that's fine.
and, but you probably want to see the 100-foot buffer too.
I think the 100-foot buffer, which you would, you know, tie your ribbons to,
Yeah.
you know, anyway, yeah.
Easy enough.
And then there were some health and water department comments we received for this. I think we passed them on to Susan at least, so those should be, and I think you're aware of them anyway, those should be addressed in the definitive plan. So ultimately, my recommendation would be that the open space plan is superior to the grid plan, and that you approve the preliminary plan, you know, subject to these conditions.
Very good. Any questions from the board? Any comments from the floor? If so, please address the, approach the podium, record your name, and let us know your name and address, please.
Great. Just write my name down here. My name's Lisa Martin. I own the abutting property on the map there. I'm kind of left to the Hidden Pond Circle there, which is currently private residence. The land that I well, one, I kind of want to talk about the comment about the pond being time of year. I've lived there for quite a few years now, and that pond that's a false comment. I actually have a picture on my phone from the other day when we had 20 ducks migrating southland in that pond. It's typically full year round. I do have some concerns about when the wetlands were delineated, I think is the right word. It was done on May 27th, and as you are aware, we had a really dry spring, summer this year, so I do have concerns about the measurements taken at that time. It was an abnormal time of year. I spoke with the lady who came out to do it, so I know exactly the date she came to do it as well. I also want to make the board aware that my property is legally court-ordered to be unbuildable, and it has to stay in its natural habitat. So you have surrounding land court-ordered to this property that has to stay there. So I have concerns around the buffering, against my property. So my property can't be touched or built upon, but yet, a few feet away, we can tear everything down. So I'm concerned about the buffering and like to know more information about, is the buffering staying in its natural habitat? What exactly does that mean? But I just wanted to make everyone aware that there is a court order for that piece of property that states it has to be unbuildable and stayed in its natural state. I think those are my comments for now.
Thank you, Ms. Martin. Is there anybody else? Oh, Mr. Stoltz.
Why is it under the court order not to be built on?
We purchased it that way. It was already deemed that way when we purchased it.
And you don't know why?
I don't have it in front of me, yeah.
Bill, I know the backstory to Hidden Pond Circle. Yeah, it went through land court. Basically, a subdivision that was approved by the planning board back in the early 2000s. It was appealed through land court, and ultimately, the land court found that only 3 of the 5 lots were actually building lots.
2.
2 of the 5 lots were building lots. Effectively, these lots are open space along Hidden Pond Circle. They can't be built upon. They can be owned, but they can't be built upon.
And we can't tear anything down. It has to stay in its natural state
Yeah,
as part of the order.
right.
It's on that property, though, right?
That's on that property. So it's not a general determination about wetlands in this area. It's a product of having permitted that subdivision and it being appealed. Much of the appeal was for ownership purposes. And rights, there are confusing rights into Hidden Pond Circle from Little Road and what is called an ancient way in some circles, that middle road, which you can see is noted as burdening this property, also runs over some of Hidden Pond Circle. There were, some folks were claiming rights in Middle Road and Little Road out there, and that definitely affected this land court case about what ultimately was developable out as part of that subdivision. Yeah. So I think that relates to that permitting for the subdivision, rather than being a statement about wetlands restrictions in the area.
Could you just tell us your name again so I can figure out where
Yep.
you are on here?
Lisa Martin.
Oh,
Thank you very much. Is there anybody else who would care to address the podium or address the board?
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Trevor Childs. My wife, Jacqueline Cashman. We live, let me do this right now. We live also on Hidden Pond Circle.
Okay.
And yeah, I guess, we just became aware of this meeting yesterday, so I've had a crash course in normal planning board versus open space and cluster development. So, I'm just wondering, as I agree with Lisa here, that it's definitely a pond, and it's a substantial wetlands, and we do wonder where it was delineated and what time and how that will go through Concom. But that does really then force the issue of where do these lines all come up into the roadway, and is there, easy access back there? Just some points here. So in the first instance, if you were to do the grid plan, is that already assumed based on your review of their layout that those 5 lots would have been allowed? Because I do wonder about lot 1 with that road and the features around that. Is that a given that as you've reviewed that first plan, that established 5 lots would be allowed?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair,
Yes.
that would be my opinion.
Yep.
In reviewing that grid subdivision plan, it was prepared in accordance with the zoning bylaw, meets the dimensional requirements of the zoning bylaw, and establishes the baseline number of lots, 5 lots, that one could do under the open space plan.
And didn't understand the back and forth. If we found that the wetlands was larger than presented here, why would that then not, and it affected lot sizes, would it not then go to 4 lots?
Right, because wetlands count against, you need enough upland on a lot. So you can have a lot that's 80,000 square feet, but 40,000 of it must be upland, at least in the zoning district. So if there's more wetlands than are delineated here, it may affect, I'm not saying it necessarily
No,
will,
understood.
it could potentially affect the number of lots one could do under a grid subdivision. I think that's unlikely, but,
Okay.
and certainly what would be more likely is not to have more wetland area, but to shift where those wetlands buffer lines might be, which may affect the layout of the road. But even on the grid plan, I think you showed a 50-foot layout, which you don't need for 5 lots. Only needs to be a 40-foot layout. So it didn't even need to be that big on the grid plan.
Okay. And then, just quick review of cluster studies. The road cannot go into wetlands, and it does have a bit of interference with the buffer zone?
Yeah, well, the layout is, in the grid plan, the layout is within some of the 100-foot buffers, but there's also a traveled roadway within the road layout. So merely because a road layout is 50 or 40 feet wide, doesn't mean they're gonna pave a road to 50 or 40 feet wide. I think the zoning bylaw calls for 5 lots to be 22 feet.
Okay.
We would actually like to see less.
Okay. And the circles, I read about those. That's just a requirement that in a cluster or open space you demonstrate you can put a 50-foot circle? Or is that necessarily where the houses would go, or is that remain to
No,
be?
Within an open space subdivision, that's how you determine minimum lot width. By putting a circle of the required frontage into the lot area itself.
Okay,
So they meet the minimum width for open space residential lots.
okay. And it's missing in lot 1. Is that just a mistake?
Missing lot 1.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And then lot 4, already requiring a variance for a panhandle, is that?
Not a variance,
Yeah, it's not a.
Or I'm not using the correct terminology.
Yeah, it's actually, you don't even need to seek a panhandle lot for an open space subdivision because you're already allowed to have reduced frontage. The frontage requirement is 50 feet in an open space residential subdivision.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's otherwise 150 feet, but in an open space subdivision, you can do 50 feet of frontage. You don't need special dispensation like you heard in an earlier case we had.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, because I'm just reading these charts and it says, it would be 35 feet and there's an asterisk and they're
Yeah.
looking for something
Actually, you're right,
separate.
it's 35 feet, it's not even 50, it's less than the 50. So you're allowed as a matter of right in an open space residential subdivision to have reduced frontage,
Okay. But they're seeking even less than that on that lot.
which is allowed under the schedule for open space residential subdivisions. It's not a variance. There's actually, I have to refresh my memory about the zoning bylaw, but there's 2 frontage requirements. If one lot is behind another lot, they could be 50 feet rather than 35. But I've reviewed this plan with the bylaw beside me and determined that it met the dimensional requirements in the zoning bylaw.
And the 18%, well, the pond takes up about 18% of the wetlands, and that's included in the open space of, 60% required to make an open space plan?
It's not 60% required, it's 30%.
Okay,
Now, there's a 50% requirement if you want to seek road reduction standards. I've always been a little confused about that in the zoning bylaw because an applicant has the right to seek road waivers anyway. So you don't need the zoning bylaw to allow for waivers from minimum road construction requirements because the subdivision rules and regulations allow that anyway.
okay. And then just to be clear, on that, this may go forward and all that, and clearly all that we're looking for is, it's a very secluded area, we love the nature, the animals, and just wondering, is that 50 feet on the, I guess, it's technically the eastern side, but it's northern here. Is that a is that part of the design plan that it has to be 50 feet for that? Or is that they were just trying to create a buffer area?
I don't know what you're talking about.
Where it says hidden,
Yeah,
just that 50 feet from the road down.
Right.
I didn't know if that's a design consideration, it had to be 50 feet, or if it,
there are
Could be more.
requirements to have certain buffers around the perimeter of a subdivision. Those can be reduced when there's a budding open space.
abutting open space.
There isn't a budding open space directly there to Hidden Pond because that's a road layout.
Yeah,
But to the west of this, there's another open space subdivision. And you don't need those same buffer requirements around the perimeter because open space abuts this land
okay.
from another subdivision.
All right, no, this has been helpful. And just the last question, in an open space, does it remain untouched? Does it remain undisturbed? Or would they be clearing the whole lot? Or is in construction, that buffer remains trees in vegetation?
Whatever is in the open space, basically with some limited exceptions, has to remain undeveloped, undisturbed in perpetuity. It will be subject to either conservation restriction or it will be subject to essentially a conservation deed to the town that the town would hold for open space purposes.
Okay,
They are allowed, now, there are some types of development that are allowed in the communities. Drainage, roadways, certain buildings are allowed. I don't think they're proposing any here. But in certain cases, a clubhouse might be allowed as an open space amenity. This isn't the type of subdivision I would expect to see that here.
okay. Thank you. Thank you for your
Thank you,
time.
Mr. Charles. Yes, sir.
Hi, John Burns. My wife and I live at 9 Little Lane. We also own the property at 1119 Orleans Road. The access to that property is through this property at that little triangle type of thing. Will that be in any way affected? I can show you.
This is Middle Road here,
Yeah.
and this is the access to this property. It's like an ancient cartway or whatever. But part of this property's on this side and this side. I don't know if this could be open space or whatever, but we have to have the right to get vehicles in and out of there.
Yeah, all I can simply say is a regulatory decision can't take away any rights that exist.
Okay.
If you
that's-
have rights there, you have rights there.
All right.
Yeah.
Just one other comment. After a wet and snowy winter, that pond is full. And then you have a dry winter, dry summer, it is actually dried up completely. So it comes and goes. It's a vernal pool.
Mud pond, right? Yeah, it is.
Thank you, Mr. Burns. Are there any comments from the board, questions for the applicant, for Mr. Eidman?
If I can just add one thing to those who are in attendance. If this goes through a formal definitive plan, then abutters will receive notice. There will be newspaper publication, and abutters will receive notice.
Yeah, we didn't know. We all just found out about this, so that's nice that you can tell us that. We didn't know.
Yeah. Now, if you're an abutter subject to being provided notice, then you would get notice before a hearing of the definitive plan. Whether this is approved or denied, this exercise tonight isn't a permit at all.
Right.
This could get denied, they could still move forward with the actual plan. If this is approved, it doesn't give them any permit rights. That's why this is actually, the chair was generous and he allowed everybody to speak who wanted to. But this isn't actually a public hearing tonight. When a formal definitive plan gets put forward, if it does, then it would be subject to full public hearing. People have the right to speak, and those abutters within 300 feet of the development would get mailed notice. And then there would be newspaper publication of notice of a hearing, of course, prior to the hearing.
Mr. Chairman?
I'll just make one comment on the wetland delineation. Wetland delineations aren't dependent on the time of year. Just education. So what a wetland specialist will do is go out and look at the vegetation. And if it's more than 50% or more wetland indicator species, the transition point of where it becomes less than 50% is the limit of the vegetated wetland. Wetland indicator species are not impacted by yearly changes in precipitation. So we could have 2-3 years of drought. The plants will survive. It takes decades for a wetlands plant to either disappear or propagate, because it's over decades, and they can take yearly changes in the amount of precipitation. So it really doesn't matter what time of year the wetland specialist goes out there, based upon the vegetation. They're experts. They can look at a plant in the wintertime or the summertime when it's in full bloom and know that it's a wetland indicator species. So,
Thank you. Mr. Stoltz?
I have a question for Mr. and Mrs. Burns. Is that the only access you have to your lot?
Middle road, middle, yeah.
It runs off of Mill Road, but it also can be accessed from Hidden Pond Circle.
Okay,
Middle road
so you have
all the
2
way to the
accesses
state.
to the lot?
Not to,
No,
but is Hidden Pond, I think Hidden Pond is its own right away. I think this would be your primary.
Oh, that's,
Yeah, that's the address to the house.
Yeah.
It's Orleans
There's like an
Road.
escape route to keep going down Middle.
I know the road.
What?
I know the road, and
Oh, okay.
I know the whole area but behind there, but
And it goes all the way through the depot, technically, but it's all a dirt road.
Right.
And it's just been there for years, but the address of the cottage in there is 1119 Orleans Road.
but you do have 2 accesses.
Yeah, I mean, that's the driveway, but yes, I mean, the road is there.
Are they deeded?
I'm sorry?
Are they a deeded access?
No. Not that I'm aware of. According to the town, this is a road that had always been there, always would be there.
And,
At one time, they tried to block it, and they couldn't, they weren't allowed to block that. That is the address of the cottage that's been in there since God knows when, way back when.
does Middle Road go right through your property?
Was that, I mean, we have property on that side, and then this
No.
side, Middle Road is a road.
We have property on the
Little Lane.
west side of Middle, and we live on the east side. Little Lane is on the east side of Middle Road.
Okay.
All right, so what's the will of the board right now? How would you like to proceed?
People want to make a vote or not, or?
hearing?
No public
Well,
hearings are closed.
it's just a meeting.
No public hearing are closed.
Just make a motion, Mary.
All right, I'll make a motion. Let's see, I would move that the planning board in case number 2021-24, move to adopt the recommended findings set out herein, the staff report on PB 2021-24 off Orleans Road for a preliminary open space residential subdivision plan dated November 17th, 2021, and approve the preliminary subdivision plan for the proposed open space residential development of Orleans Road for Eastwood Companies, subject to the recommended conditions and approvals also set forth herein.
Second.
Any further discussion? Why don't we take a vote? All in favor of the motion, signify.
Aye.
All opposed? It's unanimous.
Thank you very much, members
you.
of the board.
Thank you for your patience.
For John, who is administrating the selectmen's permit?
Yeah, I mean, they're the stormwater authority.
Right?
Well,
And we have on-call engineering, so VHB is our on-call engineer now. So when we get an application in for stormwater,
okay.
I assume what we will do is we will transmit that to VHB, who will review it and provide their comments to the select board as the stormwater permitting authority. And I will probably be the lucky one who will draft the decision.
Just, the town going to be hiring a new engineer soon, or? No.
I wish I knew.
One step at a time.
Okay.
Are you
I'd like to also
interested?
thank the abutters and neighbors for coming out. Appreciate your
interested?
input this evening, truly.
And we want to know why you didn't bring Susan with you tonight.
Because she's living in Vermont now.
Is she
Oh, that's
really?
right. She's been Zooming a couple of times, I guess, right? Last few-
Well,
few meetings.
they built a second home in Vermont on the south end of Lake Champlain.
Oh, great.
And they've had that as a second home for many years.
I know
And
the area pretty well,
I'm sure you do.
yeah.
I don't know that there's anything you don't know, Joe.
No, but,
But, you know, Mike wanted to slow down and retire, so he did. And he's working in a hardware store or something up there. And then Susan wanted to continue to work for us, but they sold their house in Brewster, and they both moved up to Vermont a couple of years ago. And Susan, as you all know, those that know her, is the most remarkable woman. And she's still working for us and does a great, great job in a remote setting. He does a fabulous job.
wonderful.
That's great.
Wonderful.
Well, thank you for your appearance here this evening.
Thank you very much.
Got a little
Thank you.
business to take care of for
I
housekeeping.
haven't seen you
and-
for a while.
Susan's been with me for 23 years.
Oh, he hasn't seen you.
No, I mean, we haven't seen you.
Well, that's because Susan always came.
I know that.
She does a much better job than I do.
Joe, we're not done yet.
Joe, we've got a couple of items here.
Oops, sorry.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Right.
I'd like to put before you the minutes of our meeting from October 14th. Any comments, motions?
I move second.
Second, any comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? We have some advisory opinions for the Historic District Historical Commission. Ms. Maslowski.
I have no comment on them. I'm here to take comment if the planning board wants to.
Okay.
She's from the historical.
Yeah, I don't know what the board wants to do, but there's a particular matter on the
Yes.
historic agenda coming up that I would like to comment on as the planner. I don't know if you want to join in. I think there's kind of an intriguing possibility there, and I have some plans. Usually, it's hard for you to comment on these things because I know the plans don't get transmitted to you. But there's a property along 109 Parallel Street.
Yes, somehow I thought you were going to bring that.
Yeah, that has always struck me because there's this real, Parallel Street also kind of demarcates one of the boundaries of the historic district. And unfortunately, there's one property there that really doesn't support the streetscape and doesn't delineate, I think, that edge of the historic district as best it could. And here's the house currently. It's kind of an unremarkable ranch house, though it's a two-family at 109. That's it. It's set back a good distance from the roadway.
And this is on Parallel Street?
This is on Parallel Street.
Yep.
And this is a, certificate of appropriateness that's gonna be requested. Here's the,
One up from where the Royal used to be,
Yep.
and that little house next to it, next house up.
Oh, okay.
It's next to the guest house.
Who owns that?
I think Greg Winston does. And this isn't,
I hope he comes. We owe him one.
I don't wanna even get it.
Well,
I
don't
know
get
if
me
that means
started.
that. But, okay.
Joe.
Yeah, so, this is without commenting on a particular design, I think what is intriguing to me is you have a more substantial house that, there's no site plan for this, but I would hope what the historic district might require is that it be moved a little closer to the streetscape to help define it. Now, it's the historic district's commission to determine what the actual design is gonna be. There's certain things on this building that I think might be problematic, the widow's walk thing, but the interesting thing about this building to me is there's a referent in the building we're looking at now. Everything else seems to be Greek Revival. This is one of the only colonial revival buildings in this entire village. And this is a referent, that I think is a referent to this building, which is kind of interesting. Now, I think the historic district should play with it a little bit. The hip roof probably needs to be a little shallower, probably shouldn't be as square. But I think what I would like to pass on is there's an opportunity there to improve the streetscape on Parallel, to have a more substantial building with a better referent, especially to other important civic buildings in the village, but still, of course, reserving to the historic district their purview over the specific design features. So that's kind of my my thinking about that particular property. I think there's an opportunity, but I don't know if that's just the town planner speaking, or if that's anything that the planning board wanted to join in, or make your own comment.
Are they gonna be tearing down that other house?
Yes, the ranch house, yeah,
I call it Cape, but that's,
okay.
Thank you for the,
So
And,
that's-
and they're gonna tear down the one on the corner?
No,
no.
no.
Separate
This
property.
This
is,
is up on parallel.
yeah, this
Further
is,
up on Parallel?
Yeah.
this is the
Up from the
existing
corner.
house. That's the existing house. And it's set back a good ways from, the street. To me, there's, that part of the historic district, the boundaries are not that well defined.
Right.
is
So that's that for the historic district.
Mary, is that-
HDHC will take whatever comment the planning board wants to take or the town planner wants to take. We're happy to
Very good.
review them.
Mary,
That's gonna be before you?
Yes.
Is that home 100 years old?
It's just subject to demo delay.
That one, I know, it's because
one
it's
they're
in the
gonna demo?
district. It's because it's in the
Because of the
district, it's coming before us under a certificate of appropriateness.
Exactly. I think the assessor's records has it as a 1960s construction.
Okay.
It doesn't look, yeah, I was gonna say,
Yeah,
it doesn't
it
look
didn't look
like
100.
it's,
Yeah. It was actually, it's a two-family, it was built as a two-family. So that building that you saw, I think is proposed to be a two-family.
The Colonial?
Yeah,
Yeah, I saw that floor plan. It is gonna be two-family.
yeah, yeah. I do have a comment on, even though it's not on the agenda, I have a comment, interesting note on the ZBA. We're kind of between agendas for the ZBA, based on our meeting schedule. There's a matter that's going to be on the ZBA agenda that the board saw previously. You'll recall that the London family, Michael and his wife, sought safe and adequate access from Nathan Walker Road to build a proposed house out there. Nathan Walker Road is this ancient way in Hawks Nest Park. It's about a 6-acre parcel, and one of the unique features of it is Nathan Walker Road cuts right through it, but it's still a single lot for zoning purposes. Apparently, they've entered into an agreement with the Harwich Conservation Trust, where they want to sell the northerly part of that land, which is bisected by Nathan Walker Road, near the pond, and sell that to the Harwich Conservation Trust, which is a wonderful opportunity, and it really meets the intent of the Six Ponds District. In order to do that, unfortunately, the Londons need a zoning variance, because they're essentially altering a pre-existing non-conforming lot. So I would actually, as the planner, just like to provide my support to that variance, because I think it meets the intent of that district. And there aren't very many things I see that actually meet the statutory conditions for a variance, but I think that does, because in my opinion, the hardship is created by that unique feature, which is that roadway that cuts through a single property, but doesn't actually create two different lots. So in order to create those natural two different lots, you actually create a zoning noncompliance issue. So I'm planning to go to that particular hearing and make my comments.
I would support the planning board supporting that, the comments.
Yeah, I would agree.
Think so?
So do we need a motion for the planning board to sign on to the comments to be made by the town planner at the upcoming zoning board of appeals?
Or a
Sure.
resolution, or
Yeah.
Motion made.
second? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Very good. I have two other final items of business. I got a call from Larry Brophy a couple of weeks ago saying that Al Atkinson, who had served on this board twice from 2008 to 2011, and again between 2013 and 2016, had passed away. He wanted us to be reminded of him and convey his condolences to anybody that was.
Alan?
Yes, Alan Atkinson. The second item is that
I was
Alan, a
surprised,
second
really.
Alan,
Jim.
No, there were two
There were
Atkinsons.
two Atkinsons, okay.
right, Alan Atkinson.
He was off
Second-
just before I got on
There are
there.
two Allens, though. The second Alan is Alan Peterson, who has resigned from the board.
I'm sorry to hear that.
So that's a tragedy. We have a letter, the planner is holding a letter that we will all sign off on the way out.
I'm gonna pass this along now.
Wishing him Godspeed. And this leaves an opening on the board, so if you all have any ideas about who we might want to approach, let's get that stuff to Elaine, and so she can make, I suggest that Elaine would be the person to make the contact. I don't know, maybe it would be you.
We could
or-
pass it on to the selectmen, but
The
there is
selectmen,
like a
okay.
talent bank or something like that.
right.
And then they have an appointments committee
The
or.
applications are in the town clerk's office. You can pick one, they can pick one up on the way in, and
Right.
they usually get dropped off in the selectman's office.
Okay, good.
For the review committee and the selectmen to consider.
Right.
Yeah, and that is, Duncan, at some point, you're gonna make the presentation before
December 13th.
the selectmen.
Yep.
Okay, December 13th, you'll be before the Board of Selectmen, and I've prepared some of my thoughts for Duncan as well.
This is your annual.
Yeah, and I think one of the important thoughts is just to pass on, we need members.
Right.
So I think David will be going away remotely.
Right.
Florida. We're missing a full member now with Alan, who sold the house.
Right.
And we don't have
Arthur's
any
gone.
alternates.
Right.
Yeah.
So we need three people to step up.
Right.
Um,
And supermajorities are 5, so for many special permits, we need at least 5 just to have a quorum.
Right.
Do they have a
So,
lot of applications out?
Is there multiple copies of that letter, or?
No, but I can make copies and.
No, I didn't look, it felt like there were 2 or 3 sheets of paper.
Oh, no, it's just very elegant paper,
No, it's a.
super thick.
I'm not used to that.
Yeah.
so I also, with regard to the report to the Board of Selectmen on the 12th, the 13th, is there a reason to update it from the last meeting? Because we'll only have one meeting that will not be in with the data from that particular report. Is it worth doing? Because I just simply emailed her back with,
I don't think so.
okay, good.
Yeah.
That's the way I thought about it.
Yeah. Another Allen matter, so now we're down a vice chair. If any of you would like to serve, think about it. I mean, we don't have to take a vote or motion tonight, but think of
Everybody in the pipeline.
anybody in the pipeline for a new member. I've asked, it doesn't appear that anybody has submitted their name, but, I've just asked the town administration. Maybe somebody has submitted since I last asked.
And
So that's,
Larry Brophy, if he's willing to return.
yeah, I don't, Larry seems pretty happy on the Affordable Housing Trust now.
And he's not around that much.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
He's down in Florida
He was a
now.
Florida
Yes.
member too, so.
I just saw him recently.
I have a-
How
I have a
long
friend
was
that-
Alan? Alan was on the board a while, wasn't he?
Denied.
11 years, I
Calling
think.
to see if he's in.
11 years. Where did he go? Moved out of town?
What was the story? I can't recall the details.
Yeah, we noticed that his house sold.
That's
and,
right.
Saw that.
It was hard to get in touch with him. He finally got in touch with us and just said he unfortunately can't serve because he's not a Harwich resident or even a non-resident. He doesn't own property in the town.
Oh, so he must have bought something someplace.
But he was
I know
looking
his
for other
family-
jobs, wasn't he? He was
Yeah.
at the end of the rope for the teaching, I think.
Yeah,
Especially after COVID. I mean, it's
yeah,
not, can anybody blame the guy? I mean, really?
yeah, I know. I have one other housekeeping matter. Elaine sent around a draft schedule, and I think you all received.
Yes.
I think we will have to amend the November dates. She had November 8th and November 22nd. November 8th is a state election, so we would certainly have to change that. What we're proposing instead, and it seems to fall in line pretty well, is November 15th and November 29th. So it would be October 25th, November 15th, November 29th, then again December 13th. Elaine will send this out, I just wanted
Okay.
to apprise you of that.
The 29th, and what was the first one?
It's in here somewhere.
November 15th and November 29th.
Yes, I would definitely not be able to make a November 8th date, and there is also a state primary, which I suspect is earlier in September than the 13th, so.
Okay,
And I won't make the 11:15.
okay, good. Yeah.
They usually plan that far ahead.
Yeah, and David, so David's also announced to me that he's going to be going down south again and will be asking to participate remotely. So David's gonna send his information to me, which is when he expects his dates to be, that he'll be away, December 15th to May 15th, 2022. I'll present that to the select board, and they still, even though I think there's dispensation under COVID now, the select board still wants to kind of hear those and act on them.
Right.
The request for remote participation. But as a matter of law in the Commonwealth now, we're still under the renewed rules that allow somebody participating remotely to count towards the quorum.
You don't have to have the quorum in the room, they can count towards the quorum outside the room.
Yeah.
Still.
You end up with one speaker.
Yeah, that's, what I would suggest when David.
Not this speaker, but the big one.
Yeah, what I would suggest when David participates remotely is we do it by phone, because it can get very thorny having to do it by video, because
Right.
that person participating has to be able to see everything, and everybody in the audience or presenting needs to be able to see everything on the video.
Oh, just do roll call votes, and that way, everything's on the record.
Yeah, with that member who's
Right.
participating remotely.
Yeah, it worked fine in the past, so.
Okay. I think you know the drill, you've done it, yeah.
I will just also say to you,
George, myself.
April 26th is a tough day for me,
Okay.
because it is Yarmouth's town meeting. It's the last Tuesday, starts the last Tuesday in April is our annual. So if we're 5, it's a problem.
Okay. Well, I mean, if we envision problems, then we'll carry over to another
Right.
date, yeah.
Craig?
Just wondered if you had any quick update on LCP. I saw your presentation before the select board. I thought that was good, and
Well, I have an update on the committee. So we have just sent to the Chronicle the solicitation, if you will. That will be published in the Chronicle twice in December. Deadline is the 15th of January.
And what is this?
This is for the local planning committee, which will be the committee that is impaneled or appointed by the selectmen to kind of do the yeoman's work on the local comprehensive plan update. Inasmuch as the planning board really is the entity with the authority to take that draft plan, review it, and recommend it to town meeting for adoption. It's very tough for a planning board to go through a 2-year period with what you already have to do and meet every couple of weeks. It also probably doesn't have the broad representation we'd like to see, because that local planning committee would have community at large members, but also ex officio members from a number of boards, including, as I foresee it, at least one from the planning board, one from the Board of Selectmen. So when we get to that point, the planning board should, or members of the planning board should think, and then the planning board should think, who might want to be the representative from the planning board on the local planning committee. But in the meantime, we have this member-at-large solicitation that's going to be published. It's on the website already, and so we're just expecting anybody who wants to serve should provide us a statement of interest, which can include a resume or CV as well.
The selectmen make the selection, though.
Yeah, the selectmen under the charter are the appointing authority. Yeah.
did they
But
accept?
does
your
our
rec-
chairman recommend to them, or?
No, because these are community-at-large members. When we
I understand.
we establish the ex officio members, I think it's the entire planning board who will kind of designate who the representative is. But of course, whoever that representative is has to show some interest, willingness, and ability. It's going to be a lot of work to be on the local planning committee. So I wouldn't just say, Joe, it's going to be you. That's indentured servitude.
No,
So-
thank you.
I don't know, let's not be too hasty, maybe Joe's.
You may want to, but we can't
I was kidding.
force it.
Did they accept your recommendation of, I think you recommended 11 board members?
Yeah,
And they did?
yeah. All that sounded
There's
good
a
to
lot
me.
of work involved.
There is, yeah. And if you think too much about it, it can be daunting. So it just has to be a bit of a marathon rather than a sprint. There's a lot of work tonight. Well, thank
Yeah,
you for-
and one final thing I just meant to mention, I should have put this earlier, is speaking of the West Harwich Special District, the group, Liz and Sarah from Cape Cod Commission have gotten the first draft of the document for the design guidelines with some of the imagery populated, and they're looking for more images. I'm kind of at a loss because I sent them something like a folder of 200 historical and contemporary images. I don't know what more they need, but maybe they just want guidance for a selection. But I don't know, I can't really think of any more, so I just throw that out there. If there's something, I know you were CC'd on the communications, but
I don't want to sound, this may sound like a really dumb comment. Are they aware of that? I mean, did they acknowledge receipt?
Yeah,
Because their email almost made it sound like you hadn't sent them anything.
Right, well, it was a prompt to get back after a week, but I went back, I was like, there was a huge Dropbox thing of like a gig, so they should have, it's not, but the thing is, like I said, I didn't say, okay, put, image 148 into slot N and put 112 into slot Q, and so, I don't know. I
You
mean,
might
if that's
just
what they
tell 'em-
want me to do, I'll do it, but.
You might tell them briefly that you're kind of at what you think your
Right, I
limit
mean-
is for.
Right, well, I'm happy to do it, it's just, I thought that's what Liz was doing, so, I mean, I thought they had the resources, so, anyway. All right.
Motion to adjourn?
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you all. It was a long night, a lot of cases, so
Yeah.
appreciate all your efforts.
Basket cases, too.